Alright, how's it going? Gonna be making a tier list today for all of the cheap monsters. So to start off here, we got Spiky. Spiky would definitely go in F tier for me. The armor break effect is useless throughout the entire game. The damage on Spiky is subpar, and Spiky also carries no other form of useful crowd control. So goes in F tier for me. Would never use Spiky in any sort of situation, honestly, unless I was forced to with Evil Summoner Auto. Next up here, we have Ice Cappuccino. Ice Cappuccino can do decent damage, nothing really special in terms of damage. I wouldn't say that the damage really makes this unit special in any sort of way. However, Ice Cappuccino does carry a solid stun, I guess, and I guess that damage can sort of finish off smaller enemies in Volcano Goddess. So Ice Cappuccino would go in D tier for me, I would say, or maybe C tier as well. I'll probably juggle around the monster placements a lot. So if you just want to see the full tier list, you'll probably skip to the very end and find it. But for now, I'll put Ice Cappuccino in D tier. I feel like this unit doesn't really find that much use in Volcano Goddess unless it's a budget setup. And if it is a budget setup, a normal Cappuccino will usually be used, because I don't really think that people doing Kevin Volcano Goddess farming will have a bunch of IQT farming completed for that Ice Cappuccino. Next up here, we have Fury. Fury is a pretty alright stun, I would say. Goes in C tier for me. You can use Fury as a stun throughout the classic levels. Nothing really special, nothing really bad about Fury. I would say, yeah, definitely Fury is solid C tier, just a regular stunner. Jack here would go in D tier for me. Jack is supposed to be a sort of damage oriented unit. However, there are better damage units in the early game, better damage units in the mid game, and better damage units in the late game. Right, so I definitely put Kevin in D tier here Jack in D tier here. Kevin would go in a much higher tier, but yeah, Jack goes in D tier here because there are just better damage units, and I guess Jack can be used as chip damage in the very early levels, right? But other than that, pretty much no other form of usage here. Devin for me would go in C tier. Devin provides the HP cutting ability, which I guess Devin specifically does sometimes see use in Volcano Goddess in combination with Anubis. Sometimes, even if you have a Death Bite, you'll still utilize Devin. However, Devin's not really a significant unit in any sort of way. And, in the points or in the levels in the late game where Devin does really gain value, Devin's not really a core unit in those setups as well. But, not bad and does have value for those endgame setups sometimes, I guess. So Devin goes in C tier. Teddy here, the Evo Teddy, I would say, definitely a unit really not worth going for at all. There's honestly no reason to ever play Masters Challenge to get Evo Teddy. The damage increase is minimum. The amount of time you spend putting into Masters Challenge does not justify the amount of gold or power stones you can save by just, having a normal Teddy for levels in Evil Summoner, right? I would say Evo Teddy is not time efficient to get at all. Really bad unit. The evolution changes nothing. Normal Teddy at least is a decent stun, but once you do make the sort of commitment and time to do a bunch of Masters Challenge, it's just, not efficient. Getting Evo Teddy is not really an efficient unit at all, right? Double totems here would both go in S tier for me. Obviously they're going to be used throughout the entire game, used in all the classic levels to buff up your carry. They are what enables carries to be good. Speedy is of course used in every single level in the game, every single setup in the game that is not bad uses Speedy, and even Mighty sometimes will be used in budget elemental setups, or even in faster, I guess higher efficiency setups in IQT. You sometimes see a Speedy Mighty combo in the back with Amaterasu, whereas you see a Zeus Horus as well as a Hellhound combo in the mid row to do that main bulk of the lightning damage. However, the Amaterasu and Double Totem combo will be in the back to speed up your farming. So, Mighty even retains some value in the end game as a sort of secondary buffer, I would guess. Definitely Speedy has a lot more value, but both of the units are just so important to progressing from the classic levels. And the fact that they still do retain some value, or, Speedy especially retains a lot of value in the end game levels, just really make them very, very good units, I would say. They're originally probably the contenders for best units, and I'd say they're still among some of the best units in the game just because they make your progression so much better. I could go on and on about, how good these two totems are and how pivotal they are in terms of being successful in the game, I would say. But, S tier, I think I've talked about them for long enough now. Next up, we have Yeti here. Yeti is a pretty mediocre stunner. A little bit worse than Fury, I would say. Maybe Yeti even goes in... Yeti would have gone in D tier for me. However, Yeti is good in budget Volcano Goddess farming setup, so I think Yeti can go in C tier because of that. However, Yeti's a decent stun, not good, not bad, and just pretty alright overall. Pyro is in a similar situation as Jack, where basically a damage unit that does subpar damage compared to other damage units that can be obtained as easily or even easier, so Pyro goes in D tier. Next up, we have Evo Slimy. So I'd say Evo Slimy sometimes could be worth it to pursue. You know, you play like one level of Master's Challenge, get your Evo Slimy, maybe save some gold or whatever. I would say, you know, Evo Slimy is honestly just a pretty useless unit overall. Even the amount of Power Stones or gold you do save from getting Slimy, you know, evolved from regular Slimy to be able to one-shot golems and evil summon are hard. Not really that significant of a difference, not really an evolution that's very worth in pursuing. However, the rewards you get are not that significant. The time you spend getting the Evo Slimy is not very significant either. I would say D tier, just nothing really interesting or good about this unit. Next up, we have Extra Chili here. Again, I would say with most of the evolutions, a lot of their uses are either in budget setups or, you know, even in stages of the game before that. So, you know, getting Extra Chili, I guess, can be useful for Volcano Goddess, not really even that helpful in the classic levels. But again, by the time you get to the point where you can be doing a bunch of IQT for your Extra Chili, you probably don't need to make a Kevin budget Volcano Goddess farming setup anyways, and Extra Chili doesn't really see use in any sort of good, decent Volcano Goddess farming setup, so again, D tier. Next up here, we have Sluggy. I would say Sluggy is honestly a pretty good unit overall. Usually can be a decent supportive unit in IQT, not really like a core unit in IQT, right? The slow stun combo with a slow plus the Zeus stun is very good for stalling enemies, and so Sluggy does sometimes see use in IQT. However, not really a core unit there, and Sluggy is not really important in the classic levels either. Next up here, we have Infernus. I would say Infernus is a decent damage carry for the normal levels. Pretty good unit overall in my opinion. I would say not really necessary to have. There are better damage options out there, maybe even C tier for me, just because that Infernus is really not that necessary of a unit in the normal levels, right? You can use Stacky, you can use Infernus, you can use Kevin, you can use some random mythic. You get a lot of options for completing the normal levels. Infernus is a decent option for it. However, right after the normal levels are over, all of Inferno's values are lost, and therefore not that great throughout the game entirely. Next up, we have Evolved Frostbite. Exact same thing I said about Chili, just not really going to be that useful by the time you can get him, like in a reasonable amount of time and with a reasonable amount of gems. So yeah, Glacial Darkwing, not that great overall. Ash, I would say, is a pretty solid stun throughout all of the classic levels. I would definitely recommend using Ash if you get him. Very good stun, very good unit for delaying enemies and for, you know, stalling enemies, of course. So it goes in B tier for me. Solid unit overall. Puffy here goes in C tier for me. Similar situation as Infernus. I'd say they're about even in terms of their DPS abilities. Puffy is probably a little bit worse because Puffy has about even, I would say. However, Puffy can sometimes be used in IQT budget setups. However, you know, I don't really see a purpose in using IQT budget setups. The units from there aren't really that good after you get them for, you know, with the budget setup, farming in reasonable amounts of times. The important IQT units are Archimedes and Swolsidon, but they take such a ridiculous amount of time to farm. A budget setup won't really cut it there. So, you know, Puffy goes in C tier for me. Decent damage, sometimes used in IQT budget setups. Not much reason to use those IQT budget setups. And Puffy is just a decent damage unit in the normal levels. Lightning here is just another alright stun. Goes in C tier for me. Same situation as Yeti. Solid stun, but not that great of a stun to where Lightning would ascend the tiers here. Slime King for me would definitely go in S tier. Slime King guarantees consistent JR hard clear. Slime King is used as a stun throughout the entire game after you get him, even if you're not using Slime King as DPS. And yeah, overall very good. Can sometimes speed up your farming setups, can sometimes slow down your farming setups. I would say that, you know, Slime King's utilization in farming setups is kind of inconsistent, but that option is still there depending on the units you have access to. Yeah, I would say S tier, really good unit overall, really good stun, used throughout the entire game, very versatile, very flexible, and a pretty good option for getting your first JR hard complete as well. Next up here, we have Deathbite. I would say Deathbite goes in B tier. Deathbite is like Devin, right, comboed with Anubis in the elemental challenge levels, can cut down HPs of enemies for your first nightmare clear sometimes. Very solid and versatile ability that gains more and more value as you progress into the end game. Good combination with Anubis, as I said, and Deathbite will be utilized in pretty much all of the elemental challenges, as well as sometimes in the nightmare levels, depending on the setup you're using. However, Deathbite can still be helpful there, so I'd say Deathbite goes in B tier. Next up here, we have Felina. I'd say Felina would also go in B tier for me. I would say the only real usage of Felina is, well, actually, first of all, Felina can be used in farming setups to slightly speed up your farming speed times. However, Felina can be also used to clear the nightmare levels only if you are using CMG. Other than that, Mr. Flamey clear or a mythic clear is definitely a more viable route. However, if you are using CMG, you don't have a mythic, you can use Felina as your carry for those nightmare levels. So Felina would definitely go in B tier. Decent unit, can speed up your farming setups a little bit. I would say a lot worse than a lot of people consider her to be. I would say she's kind of overrated sometimes, but again, her usages are a little bit limited. Decent unit, right? Clyde here would also go in B tier for me. Clyde is good for speeding up farming setups, and that's pretty much it. However, that single use kind of pushes Clyde up into the B tier area here. Just if you don't have something like a Jiraiya, you know, use like a Clyde, Mr. Flamey as your like main basic attacking units in your classic level farming setups, right? Very solid for helping you get to the higher star level special units, and so yeah, pretty good. Wait, actually here, I was just doing a cheap unit tier list, so I'm actually gonna move this Felina back. This is just cheap units. I forgot what I was doing there. Anyways, Kevin would go in S tier for me. Kevin is a very strong carry for the normal levels. Kevin is a viable carry for JR Hard as well. Kevin is very good to be used as a main unit or main DPS for elemental challenge budget farming, so very good for obtaining that Mr. Flamey and utilizing that Mr. Flamey to get your first nightmare clears. Kevin can also be used as main or supplementary DPS in the nightmare levels himself. I would say as main DPS, wouldn't really recommend. It is doable with some setups, however, very difficult, very tedious, can require a lot of gems. Yeah, just I wouldn't really recommend going with that path to clear nightmare with Kevin as your main carry. However, Kevin can also be good supplementary damage there, which means that with all the other uses that I just listed with Kevin, Kevin is definitely pushed up to S tier here. Next up, we have Rudolph. Rudolph is, again, DPS unit with bad DPS, D tier. Next up here, we do have Grimy. Armor break is useless. Grimy's damage is subpar, and Grimy is bad. Next up, who do we have? We have Monkey. Monkey can serve as a stun, I would say, so I guess Monkey goes in C tier. However, that stun, nothing special again, and the damage on Monkey is really nothing interesting either. So Monkey goes in C tier for me. Next up here, we have Slimy. Slimy, damage unit, no good damage, D tier. However, I would say, you know, I think Slimy's damage is abysmal to the point where Slimy would end up in the F tier area here because, yeah, Slimy is just not that great of a monster. I guess, you know, you do need Slimy to get your first complete on, or, you know, complete the tutorial, right? However, yeah, Slimy is just not that great overall, in my opinion. Mocha is also, yeah, I would say Mocha's an F tier unit. I would say really bad DPS. Honestly, I don't really think it's fair to put up the Rudolph here with Jack and Pyro. They have slightly better DPS, but their DPS is still pretty garbage. So I'd still put Rudolph down here in the F tier area. And you know what? I guess, you know, I'm going to keep Evo Teddy here actually because I hate Master's Challenge and you should never play it. Next up, we have the Sparky. Sparky, decent stun, C tier, can retain value in budget IQT farming, but again, why would you do that? Next up, Cappuccino, decent single target stun, C tier. Teddy, decent stun, C tier. Next up, Chili, decent stun, C tier. Next up, we have Frostbite, pretty good stun, B tier. Also good in budget Volcano Goddess farming setups, which are actually used because of the Mr. Flamey Nightmare Clear route that you can farm a little bit for. Next up here, we have Evo Ash. Evo Ash, I feel like doesn't really see any sort of usage in the end game. And again, not really worth pursuing, like actively pursuing even with a budget setup. I guess you'll end up getting dust if you are using like a good Volcano Goddess farming setup, but at that point, when you can get to the point where you're beating out all of the elemental challenges anyways really easily, not really much left for you to do in the game, and Dust really won't find that much of a purpose. So D tier, not really worth to pursue this unit unless you have way too much, unless your setup is good and you kind of have nothing else to do in the game. Next up here, we have regular Flamey, same situation as Clyde, B tier, good for speeding up your farming setups. Next up, we have Skellington. Skellington, again, D tier, I would say not really worth it to pursue Skellington as an evolution. And, you know, even after you get Skellington, I guess Skellington can be used as a unit in KPR, but, you know, I feel like by the time you get that many Volcano Goddess gems, your KPR setup will be good to go anyways, considering that farming Skellington in a reasonable amount of time with a reasonable setup, you know, by then you'll have a good KPR setup because you'll have pretty much experienced most, or if not all, of the mythic rotations anyways. Next up, Mr. Flamey. Mr. Flamey definitely goes in S tier for me because Mr. Flamey opens up a very solid route to clear the nightmare levels, I would say. Mr. Flamey can be farmed with a Kevin setup, used in the nightmare levels to clear them, and just a very, very solid unit overall, I would say. Definitely something that you want to utilize in the nightmare levels if you aren't using like a CMG method to clear them, to, you know, boost up like a Mythic or a Felina to carry. And so then the Mr. Flamey route is the best strategy for getting your nightmare level clears. Very good unit, right? X Pyro, again, D tier, not really going to be utilized that much. I would say X Pyro probably even goes in F tier for me, because even after the evolution, X Pyro really sees no sort of usage in KPR at all. The damage is pretty abysmal even after evolution. Next up here, we do have Stacky. Stacky is like a pretty solid sort of baseline unit for getting your elemental challenges done. Getting your first clears on the normal level, Stacky can be pretty good for that purpose, I would say. And then in terms of other units left, Evo Mocha, not worth it. Don't get Evo Mocha. Not really going to save you that much. Rocky is a very alright stun, and then Spidey is a pretty bad slow, goes in D tier for me. I have no one in A tier. Okay, so this tier list is not done, by the way. I'm going to rearrange a bunch of stuff here. This is like the rough draft for the tier list. So in terms of S tier, I would definitely still keep double buffs up there. Yeah, I definitely still want to keep double buffs up there. Maybe moved. Oh yeah, this is not just like the cheap monsters ranked amongst themselves. This is with the, as I said, I described the CMG stuff. So all of these units are still ranked with consideration to the ranks of the expensive monsters, which I might do in another video. But these are the cheap monsters just ranked against all monsters here in their tiers that they would be, even if they were ranked against other monsters. So I'd say maybe, honestly, I could say Slime King maybe goes in A tier, because Slime King is still very good for getting your nightmare clears. However, or not nightmare clears, but your JR hard clear. However, the stun's good, right? Except Slime King is not like necessary for progression. And what I mean by that is basically, I guess in the normal levels, you just use whatever carry, double totems. In JR Hard, you can use Kevin, except you can also use Slime King, I guess. So I'd say Slime King still remains the S tier area for me. Really hard for me to put something in A tier, actually, because I would have used to put Kevin in A tier. However, I think Kevin's importance is very, very prominent because of his use in the Volcano Goddess budget farming setup. So I think Kevin still remains in the S tier area for me. I think it's these lower tiers where I have to consider it a little bit more. Definitely keep the B tier as it is right now. I mean, anything from C tier that I would move up to B tier, probably not. Yeah, probably not, I would say. In terms of, you know, the units that can go there. Maybe I should move up some of these B tier units into A tier, but I don't really see them being, you know, that A tier quality, right? Deathbite's not really a main part of the elemental farming setups. Although Deathbite is good, I guess. You know, Clyde Flamey can be replaced with other better farming units. And This is really difficult for me actually. I guess I'll try and fix this C to F tier area here. So everything in C tier should just be like decent stuns. Yeah, I think C tier is pretty good right now. In terms of the D tier units, okay, so maybe let's move some of these units a little bit lower. Maybe like a Spidey a little bit lower, but Spidey can also be like a slow sometimes. So even then, I think Spidey should stay there. I think Pyro and Jack can remain there as well. Subpar DPS. Most of these guys are just evolutions. That's not really to say the evolutions are bad. I'm just saying like they're not worth it to pursue, right? Not going to be time efficient to try and get them throughout most stages in the game until the point where you're basically done with the game. So I think all these units still stay there. In the F tier, maybe I should move up Spiky. Spiky can be better supplementary DPS than Grimy in my opinion. And then regular Slimy can stay there. Rudolph can stay there. X-Pyro can stay there. Was it Omega Mocha? I think that's the evolution's name. I think Mocha can still remain in F tier. Although, I wouldn't say Mocha is like actively... Like, if you're trying to farm for Evo Teddy, that's like actively really wasting your time. But I guess there is some reason to get Evo Mocha, I guess, you know, save some resources to upgrade to a point where you can one-shot the enemies in Evo Summoner Hard. So, you know, maybe Evo Mocha goes in D tier here. These other units in D tier, I think, should remain in D tier. I would say, honestly, the D and F tier are pretty much mixed. Just all units that you really shouldn't try and focus on, try and get. Pretty unimportant, pretty bad, and not worth it to pursue. That's not to say like I guess this, you know, again with the evolutions, the evolutions aren't bad, they're just not worth it to try and get, right? By the time you can get like a Evo, like a higher cost Evo, I guess, in a reasonable amount of time, not really going to be that much use for them. And you know, an Evo like Ice Cappuccino doesn't really see that much use either. So not worth it to do a bunch of that IQT farming. You can use your time a lot more wisely to get units that are actually going to be useful, purposeful, and help out your setups a lot more. In C tier, I think everything in C tier, again, I guess could remain in C tier. I mean, yeah, they're all decent units. Everything in B tier can stay in B tier as well. Yeah, I think that's honestly just going to be my tier list. I feel like this tier list probably does have some pretty poor decisions made in it. It seems a little bit empty to me. Again, this is not based on like how strong the unit is. It's just based on like how useful the unit is throughout the game, right? How good they'll be through the game, and you know, whether or not you'll honestly actually need them. A unit can be strong, a unit can hit high numbers, a unit can stun for a lot. However, if that unit is difficult to obtain, very costly to obtain, or very costly to upgrade, depending on the stage of the game, or in most stages of the game, that unit will not really be used, not really efficient to use, or that unit will be like overshadowed by something else by the time they can be used, right? By the time they will be active, right? Even stuff like Glacial Darkwing, when you're looking to go into higher efficiency Volcano Goddess farming setups, you won't really see the use of Glacial Darkwing. So hopefully what I've said here sort of kind of makes sense. Yeah, that's gonna be it. Like, subscribe, and yeah, see ya.